This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
Hello. I don't know if you noticed the chapter topic, but liquid verbs and contract verbs. It sounds kind of interesting, doesn't it? It's a little bit unusual. No, we're not going to be talking about fluids or water. We're not going to be talking about contracts between two people drawn up on a piece of paper. But we are going to be talking about a very interesting part of what verbs do when they meet up, when their endings meet up with particular verbs whose stem ends in a vowel. Strange things begin to happen, and sometimes I like to think of it like this, that when there is a collision between a stem and its ending, that just like an automobile collision or a bicycle collision or two people running in together, sometimes things drop out when you run into another vehicle. They come together, then a bumper may fall out or something like that. Well, in a similar way, when verbs meet up with their endings, certain verbs contract, and certain letters may drop out or certain letters may get lengthened depending upon the rule that we will discuss today. So contract and liquid verbs. Let's talk a minute about what we mean by, first of all, contraction. What is a contraction? Let's take a look at this first chart. In English, we have words that contract. For example, it's the bringing together of two words, like do and not. And when those two words come together to form the word don't, we can see they contract, right? They come together, and a letter drops out, and you can see there that the letter O drops out, and you get the apostrophe there. So you have sort of a shortened or abbreviated form of these two words that have been drawn together. All right, and the word can't for can and not, and the word there for they and are, and hasn't for has and not. Those are contractions, okay? Well, in Greek, something similar occurs, and whenever you draw two things together, two letters together in Greek, contraction can take place as well. And in Greek, there are really two basic groups of verbs that we're concerned about today as far as contraction is concerned, and what happens with the liquid verbs. And so let's take a look at the first group, and that is these contract verbs. Contract verbs are verbs whose stems end in an alpha, an epsilon, or an omicron. Okay, and for example, timao. And we're going to see that in the vocabulary list of words that we'll focus on today, that you'll see a great number of those words that end in a alpha or an epsilon or an omicron. And you'll learn that by way of the lexical form, or by the way that it's presented in the book. But you're going to notice that when you get to the Greek New Testament, that they're not always just like that. In fact, usually that alpha is not there in the present, and we'll see what happens when it goes to different tenses. The next group has to do with the liquid verbs, And these are verbs whose stem ends with a liquid or nasal consonant. Okay, a liquid or nasal consonant, particularly with mu and nu. And the reason they're called liquid is just simply this, that those consonants, lambda, rho, you see, mu and nu, sort of flow when you say them. They sort of flow. Lambda, rho, mu, nu. See how they flow like liquid, just sort of flows. And that's why they're called the liquid verbs, because those verbs have stems that end in one of those consonants. Sometimes people make the distinction between the liquid and the nasal verbs because they say, well, the nasal has more of the nasally sound to it, the mu, and you have to indeed make that sound come up through the nasal passage in order to get that sound of mu and nu out there. And so they'll make a distinction between that, but still they all sort of flow like that. And so what happens to those verbs when they meet up with other letters or when they go into the future, what rules govern them, and what do they end up looking like when they go to different tenses. And that's all this chapter is about, just making you aware of some of the peculiarities, we might say, although some would argue they're not really peculiarities at all, that they follow very hard and fast rules, but maybe they're a little peculiar or different, of course, than what we have learned so far in terms of how things, what happens when a ending or a suffix ending is then attached to a stem of a verb. So liquid and nasal verbs. Now let's take a look at a few of these contract verbs and see what happens when, for example, you look at the word timao. So let's take a look at the chart now, and you'll notice that on this chart, that carefully laid out here is the word timao, just alpha and the omega as you would see it, without the plus sign, of course, on your vocabulary list. But when it goes to the present active, this alpha drops out and you get this omega. Okay, and so you have then with the ace form, what ends up happening is that the epsilon drops out and the iota runs down here. Okay, and you get this little mark over here, and we'll show you on the board here in just a moment. It'll be a little clearer to you. But when you get this, then the third person, you see the alpha is going to remain. It's going to end up being lengthened. The epsilon drops out, and the iota goes down below. So you've got a contraction. You see what happens here. So you just have to kind of be aware of that little iota subscript under there to remind you of the fact that it is that third person, or in this case, the second person, okay? Now, when you go to the plural, the same thing. The omicron gets lengthened, okay, and the alpha drops out. So this tama meets up with the ending. There's a collision, and the alpha drops out, and the omega gets lengthened, okay? And the way you can tell it's lengthened is by that accent mark, the circumflex over the omega. And so all the way down you can see the forms of how it changes. And you go to the imperfect down here now, to the imperfect active. We have the alpha plus the on ending. So the alpha drops out and the omega gets lengthened, and you have etimon, etimas, etima, and so forth. And then now let's go back up to the present active up here. The same thing happens on a word like phileo, okay? The epsilon drops out and the omega gets lengthened. You can see that by the circumflex stress being placed upon it, okay? So if you follow this through all the way down, you would see how those words play out. Now, if you went over here, the same thing with regard to delao, okay? You see the omicron there. And what ends up happening, it drops out, and the omega is lengthened with stress on that. See here, our stress was here. Now it's going to be on the end, and so forth. All right, so you get an idea then of what we're talking about in terms of letters dropping out. Now, I don't expect you to remember all of those rules and understand them all. I don't have them committed to memory, and I just pretty much try to rely when I come on a word and I'm not sure what it is. Well, I'll run to a lexicon. I'll run to an analytical lexicon and rely upon someone to maybe remind me of those rules. But if we look at it on the board, I think we can find something else interesting about this. So let's go to the board now and notice that in regard to the word timao, that here is how you would find it in your vocabulary list with the alpha there, right? Because this is a stem whose verb, this is a verb whose stem ends in an alpha. But when we go to the present tense, okay, present tense, with this omega ending on here, it tends not to like that, and so the alpha drops out, and the stress gets up being placed on the omega. So timo, okay? Then when we go to the imperfect, the same thing, okay? So it would have been on SN, and so the omicron that would have been here gets lengthened because our alpha drops out. We're going to lengthen that, so we should have a mark over that as well. In fact, I'm going to do that at this time just to emphasize that. So we get that over there, and we get that here as well. Now, so when we go to the future, what ends up happening is, in regard to the future, is that simply the alpha gets lengthened now. The alpha gets lengthened. So you can see this is an eta, so the alpha goes to an eta, and we still have the same particular word and don't have any problem seeing that. With regard to the aorist, we can see the alpha being lengthened there as well. Okay. Now, I'd like for us to turn our attention to liquid verbs for just a moment and see what happens when we begin to talk about some of these words in regard to those words that end with that liquid sound or that nasal sound. So let's go back to the board at this time. Now notice that here's our word, mano. All right, notice where the accent mark is on this first syllable, mano, okay? Mano, 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 all right? Now, if we went to the future, okay, this is present active indicative, first person singular, right? I remain. If we went to the future, the rule would say basically that we need to add a sigma in there. And what ends up happening is, and also as well, is that the rule would say that, well, an epsilon would need to go between these two, and but the sigma would drop out. And so because the sigma would drop out, then that leaves us with an epsilon omega, and Greek doesn't like that particularly, and so what's going to happen is that's going to drop out, contract, and you've got then this omega lengthening, so that now the stress is being placed on the end of our word as opposed to it being placed right here. So you don't have to really worry about this. Don't even be concerned about that. Just know that in regard to the stress, remember I said that we're not going to be greatly concerned about accent marks and so forth until they matter. Well, here's another time in which it matters, in which you will be able to see that this is present, okay, tense, but this is future. And the way that we know is because this right here, this accent mark, the circumflex, is on the end here. This is lengthened. It's being stressed. So, mno, all right, mno, minnow, minnow, all right, mno, and minnow, 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 mno, all right. So this is our future, and you just have to kind of know that and pay attention to it. Whereas it looks the same, it's spelled the same here. This is telling you that it is indeed future. Okay, at this point, that's all that I want to cover on these liquid and nasal verbs. If we wrapped it up, we summed it up, we could say what this is about, that when verbs meet up with endings, that they contract and some different things happen and they end up changing in their form a little bit. And so just be aware that that's all in the world we're talking about with regard to liquid and nasal verbs. All right, well, what I want us to do now is to go to the vocabulary and begin to talk or look at those vocabulary words. We'll go down them rather quickly, pronounce them, and then give their meaning, and then we'll work some sentences as time permits. All right, our first contract verb is agapao, I love, I love. The next word is genao, I give birth to. Our word genealogy comes from that word. All right, the next word, epitemao, epitemao, I rebuke or I warn. The next word, eritao, eritao, I ask or I request. All right, the next word, zao, zao, I live. The next word, merimanao, merimanao, I worry, I am anxious. The next word, nikao, nikao, I overcome. The next word, harao, harao, I see. The next word, planao, planao, I deceive, I lead astray. All right, the next word, temao, temao, I honor, I honor. Okay, the next word, akalutheo, akalutheo. All right, that means I follow. The next word, aiteo, aiteo, I ask. The next word, asneo, asneo, I am weak. The next word, blasphemeo, blasphemeo, I revile or I blaspheme. The next word, deo, deo, I bind or I tie. The next word, diakoneo, diakoneo, I serve or I minister. The next word, dakeo, dakeo, I think or I seem. The next word, epikaleo, 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 I call upon, I call upon. The next word, eulogeo, eulogeo, and our word eulogy comes from that word. means I bless or to say a good word about. The next word, Eucharisteo. Eucharisteo, I give thanks or I thank. Okay, the next word, Zeteo. Zeteo, I seek. The next word, Theoreo. Theoreo, I see, I perceive. The next word, Kaleo. Kaleo, I call. The next word, Krateo. Krateo, I grasp, I take hold of. The next word, Laleo. Laleo, I speak. The next word, Martyreo. Martyreo, I testify, bear witness. The next word, Metanoeo. Metanoeo, I repent. The next word, Miseo. Miseo, I hate. Oikodameo, I build, is the next word. Oikodameo, I build or I edify. All right, the next word, Parakaleo. Parakaleo, I urge. And again, notice where the stress is on these words, and you'll notice when we get later on when they contract that the stress will be a little different place. All right, the next word, Peripateo. Peripateo, I walk. Okay, or I walk about. The next word, Poieo. Poieo, I do or I make. The next word, Proskuneo, for I worship. Proskuneo. All right, the next word, Tereo. Tereo, I keep. The next word, Phileo. Phileo, I love. The next word, Phoneo. Phoneo, I call. All right, the next word, Delao, I show. Delao. The next word, Dekaiao. Dekaiao, I justify. All right, now notice all these are ending in the omicron. All right, the next word, Plerao. Plerao, I fill or I fulfill. The next word, Starao. Starao, I crucify. The next word, Teleao. Teleao, I perfect or I complete. The next word, Phanerao. Phanerao, I reveal. All right, the next word, Angelo. Angelo, I announce. Remember the double gamma has the NG sound. The next word, Iro. Iro. Notice the emphasis upon the first syllable. I take up, I take away. Then the next word, Anabino. Anabino. I go up, I ascend. All right, the next word, Apoktano. Apoktano. I kill. The next word, Apostello. 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 Actually there, Apostello. I send. All right, the next word, Bino. I go. And these are words that we've learned before. Again, Agero, I raise. Thelo is I want or I will. Katabino is I go down or I descend. Krino is I judge. Meno is I remain. And spero is I sow. Okay. Now, those last few words were words that we have learned before, but what they're getting you ready for is the fact that when they go to the future, that they will look a little bit different, or some things will happen when they go to different tenses. Now, something else I want to remind you of is this, that we had to go through those words quite hurriedly because I want to spend some time on translation, and also to remind you that when we go to those translation exercises, to just realize that you can always fall back on the analytical lexicon that we'll talk more about in part 3 of this class. But nevertheless, I wanted you to spend this time sort of just hearing those words, and also wanted to emphasize to you that we just didn't have time to really think about all the theological import relative to each of those words. That's something that I know you're going to look forward to and you're going to enjoy so very much, and I hope you'll look forward to it with much anticipation, because many of those words that we just discussed and made reference to have a very interesting etymological element to them, a study of their history, of their, of their origin and where they came from, and how they changed and what all they mean, and the meaning and the nuances that go along with them. So a whole lot to learn, and many things that are similar to words that we use, or in fact our own English words come from some of those words. So I hope you'll enjoy looking at those and studying those as time goes by. All right, in the last portion of this class then for today, let's spend a few moments just translating a few sentences so that we can begin to see a few of these rules of contraction at work. So let's go to the board now, and we'll spend some time beginning to look at some of these words. Now, I've chosen a few sentences that I think will illustrate some of the rules that we have briefly discussed. And again, these are verses that come right out of the Bible, verbatim, word for word, letter for letter. So let's take a look at some of these that I've selected. Notice this first one. Kai, agapeses, kurion, ton, theon, su, ex, hales, cardias, su, kai, ex, hales, tes, suches, su. Okay, from Mark 12:30. Well, a great verse, yes, a great phrase. Has some contract verbs here, and so let's take a look at that at this time. Both or and, or sometimes we may leave that untranslated. We'll just see kind of how that works out here in just a moment as far as kai. But I come right here and I see a word that I'm familiar with, agapao. Now I want to switch on you here a different color so that we can see, but I see my word agapao for I love, okay, but now this is the second person, o-ace, second person singular, you, and now notice, we have our sigma here telling me this is future, you shall love. Now, what ended up happening, you probably wouldn't have noticed or really cared much, but we want to emphasize it in regard to what we've learned today, and that this was an alpha. But when it went to the future, it was lengthened, okay? When it met up with this particular suffix ending, then it got lengthened, and then the stress is given right there. Which, by the way, reminds me, if we go back over to the right side of the board now, that I really should not have had this stress here. It should have been right here, and I've just made that mistake and just need to correct that there. But nevertheless, now coming back here, this basically means, not basically, but means you shall love, okay? You shall love. And what's the object of what we need to love? Okay, the Lord, the God of you, the Lord your God, okay? So the God, the Lord your God, and this all goes together here, the Lord, the God of you, or the Lord your God. And then this is the word for ek, and when it meets up, with vowels that follow it, then remember, instead of it just being ek, that what ends up happening is, because of the breathing mark and so forth, it turns into a xi, so that just simply means out of. Out of a whole, here is our adjective, and it agrees in gender, case, and number, on with this, out of a whole heart of you, okay, so with your whole heart, all right, and out of a whole of the life of you, okay, of the soul of you. So you shall love the Lord your God, basically then out of or with your whole heart and out of your whole life. Okay, Mark 12 and verse 30. All right, let's take a look at sentence number 5 now. Hemes, agapomen, agapomen, hati, altas, protas, agapesen, hemas, from 1 John 4:19. Now, hemes, hemon, hemin, hemas. If you decline that, nominative case, second person, plural, we, okay. First person plural, we. So, we, and then notice this right here. This is interesting as to what's happened. We love, this is simply present tense. Present tense. If you remember our rule that when this goes to the present tense, instead of the alpha being here, and it normally looking like this with the Omicron, that simply gets lengthened. The stress goes there, and so that's what's happening there. It's just simply present tense. So we love Hatib because, personal pronoun he, first, all right, then this is erist. Okay, this is our word for loved. See, this was the alpha. When it went to the past tense of the aorist, remember, it just gets lengthened. So, sa sin, third person singular, he, she, or it, right? He's talking about, referring to this, which we know to be God. So, we love because he first loved, hemes, hemon, hemin, hemas. Again, this is first person plural, so us. We love because he first loved us, 1 John 4:19. Okay, well, here is our last sentence now. Number 20 in your textbooks. Kai apaketenusen altan kai te trite hemera eger thesata. Now, notice that we have kai here, so and, or both. We'll just have to see how that works out. And then apaketenusen is our word here that comes, is the example of the lesson, the rules of the lesson we've talked about today. Notice usen is third person plural. Here's the word for kill, but notice that we've got this circumflex stressing, so the accent, the stress is placed right there. Whereas before, if this had gone to the future, there would have been it would have been a sigma there, but the sigma drops out on some of these nasal verbs or these liquid verbs, and as a result, stress is placed here, and so this is actually future. So they will kill him. And auton, our personal pronoun, accusative case, receiving the action of the verb, they will kill him. But or and the third day, here is our adjective. All of these agree. See the dative case endings, all of them agree. The third day, and then here is our next verb, which is a future, let's see, passive. See the theta for the passive, sigma for the future, and then our personal pronoun ending with a connecting vowel, my, sa, tai, that's third person singular, he, she, or it. So he, okay, talking about auton here, which we know will be Jesus from our context of our Bible. He shall be raised. The third day is what that is. See, agere, here's our stem, meaning raised. He's not going to raise, but he shall be raised. God is going to raise him from the grave, passive form there. So if we put all that together, and they shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised. He shall be raised. So those are just some examples of how these liquid and nasal verbs end up being utilized then in some of these Bible structures or sentences. That's all we're going to do today. I'm going to call your attention now to your homework that you have, and you'll notice that on our homework, I'd like for you to continue to work on vocabulary words. Read the chapter on participles. Read that chapter on participles. Practice translating sentences of your choosing, and then you'll be, I think, up to speed with where we need to be. It's been really good being with you. I've enjoyed teaching this class, and I'm really looking forward to our next time together, because that will be a lesson on participles, verbal adjectives. And some say that that's the complexity, and I think they're right, syntactically speaking, of the Greek language. And so we're there at the mountain. We're there at the apex now as far as the difficulty. And everything else is just minor things that have to be picked up and learned here and there. Not that there aren't words that are unusual, that are real long, that Paul will use in his letters that sometimes maybe we don't quite know, we're not used to hearing. But participles, although they're the complexity of the language, they also, the Bible abounds with them and provide a very colorful meaning to so many things. We'll examine that next time. May God be with you. Thank you so much for joining us. I bid you a very pleasant good day.